A bit loud. We're good. Hi friends, great to see you. We'll stop that. Thank you. There's a lovely song. We could keep listening, but hi, great to see you. I'm Tim, if we haven't met. And that song was a prayer for blessing for Australia. That was the first part of it. It was a song that was recorded in 2020 during the first COVID lockdown in Australia. A prayer for blessing for Australia. It was a very hard time with a lot of questions. COVID had hit the world. It had come to Australia. Infections and deaths were increasing. We were all in lockdown. And so a bunch of churches thought, let's pray. Let's pray for blessing. Let's pray for blessing for Australia, because that was a time when no one felt blessed by God. We felt cursed by God as this lockdown shut us all off from each other. A number of churches, actually about 300 churches in Australia, were represented as their leaders were recorded praying the prayer for blessing from the isolation of their homes. And the prayer they prayed was Psalm 67. It was our psalm that Lana has just read. It was actually Numbers 6, but Psalm 67 quotes Numbers 6. So there we had Christians praying our psalm, Psalm 67, in the middle of the pandemic, the first lockdown, 2020. Christians praying for blessing for Australia. Because we all want to be blessed by God, don't we? There isn't one of us who doesn't want the blessing of God, especially when times are tough. When we're going through hard times, we want God to bless us. That's our prayer. But what does it mean? What does it mean to be blessed by God? What does it mean to pray Psalm 67 as followers of Jesus, to ask God to bless us, as those churches did during the pandemic? Because when I first read through Psalm 67, preparing for today, I began to think of the blessings that I would like. And I'm ashamed to admit the things that came to mind. I want health, wealth, and happiness. I want success. I want my children's success. I want God to fix my problems and prosper my work. They're the blessings that come to mind for me. They're very self-centered. They're pretty much the same as the blessings any non-Christian person would want. Is that what Psalm 67 is about? Is it an invitation to pray like that? For God to give me what I want in my selfishness? We all want to be blessed by God, don't we? We often sign off our text messages or our emails, God bless. It's the prayer of Psalm 67. But what does it mean? What does it mean to pray for God's blessing? What are we praying for? Surely we can begin by saying that it's right to pray for blessing. That's what this psalm is. It's God's people gathered together praying for God to bless them. It starts and ends with prayer for blessing. Verse 1, may God be gracious to us and bless us. That's how it begins. And that's how it ends. Verse 7, may God bless us still. Surely it's right to pray for blessing. That's why I started with that song, which was a prayer for blessing for Australia. That was all of us in a time of need. What a great thing to do, to pray to God. Our church prayed a whole lot more during the pandemic. We had weekly prayer meetings at one point, praying for relief, praying for blessing in the difficulties of the pandemic. Australia fared pretty well, perhaps because God answered the prayers of his people. To pray to God for blessing is to recognize that God is the giver of every good gift. I love the way James puts it in the New Testament, James chapter 1. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. If there's something good, some blessing, it's from God. It's not random. It's not an accident. It's not good luck. It's the gift of God. So if you want something good, some blessing, whatever it is, it's up to God to give it. God is the giver of every good gift, of every blessing. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It comes from God. The psalm itself acknowledges this. It gets very practical. Verse 6, the land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. It's God who feeds us, who rewards our work, who grants success. God is the source of all that is good. God is the one who blesses. So ask Him. Ask Him. Psalm 67 is God's people joining together to ask for blessing. But again, what are we to pray for? There's lots of good things we might like. A car, a better car, a house, a bigger house, a new phone, health, better health. Even for our church, we've got a building, we might want a better building or a bigger building, a newer building. I can come up with a long list of things that I would like. But friends, when we look closely at the psalm, something way bigger and way better is on offer. Let's have a look. Verses 1 and 2. Let's have a look, and we start to see the greatness of God's blessing. Verses 1 and 2. May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make His face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. Before the prayer for blessing is a prayer for grace. May God be gracious to us and bless us. God's grace is His undeserved kindness, His goodness even when we don't deserve it. Keep reading. May God make His face shine on us. It's a beautiful image. It's a solar image. It evokes the light and the warmth of the sun. It's made me think of our pet dog on these cold autumn mornings. There's one spot of sun that creeps into our living room, just one little spot, and that's where our dog can be found, in that small patch of the light and the warmth of the sun. Here is a prayer that will bask in the light and the warmth of God's kindness as He makes His face shine upon us. What a great thing to pray for. But again, look at how this expression is used in the Psalms. It's actually about salvation. Look at a couple of other verses, friends, from the Psalms. Psalm 31, verse 16. Let your face shine on your servant. Save me in your unfailing love. Or Psalm 80, verse 3. Make your face shine on us, that we may be saved. We're starting to see what this prayer for blessing is all about. It's a prayer for salvation, which of course is God's greatest kindness of all. And if we're in any doubt, verse 2 makes it really clear. Again, verses 1 and 2, but look at the link. May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make His face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. Verse 1 is a prayer for blessing upon Israel. Why? So that the nations, verse 2, would know God's salvation. That is the blessing prayed for in Psalm 67. Salvation. God's kindness in salvation from judgment. And who really cares about cars or buildings or jobs when you can have salvation? God has always wanted to bless us, to bless everyone. When God first created mankind in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the very first thing he did was to bless them. Adam and Eve spurned God's blessing. They didn't want it. They turned away from the light and warmth of friendship with God and rebelled. The curse of God's judgment fell. And God's curse has touched every part of all of our lives ever since. Psalm 67 is a prayer for salvation from that curse, from that judgment that we all deserve. You see, God promised the gospel. The Bible could have ended at Genesis 11. Those early chapters of Genesis are about God's judgment, God's curse spreading across the world as deserved. That could have been it. Could have been a very short Bible. But in Genesis chapter 12, God promised blessing. He promised the blessing of salvation, the gospel. It would come to Israel first, then the nations. Jew first, then Gentile. Abraham and his family, and from there, the rest of the world. It's the most glorious promise ever made. And it sits at the beginning of Genesis 12, and it drives the rest of the Bible. Let's look at the promise, friends, because it's glorious. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. Genesis 12, 1 to 3. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." The promise of blessing to Abraham and his offspring. But more than that, it's the promise of blessing to the whole world through Abraham's line. Friends, let me use my favourite preaching toy. It's been a while. Not that long, actually. God blessed Abraham and the Jewish nation, right? This is Israel. A small nation receiving God's blessing, but God never wanted to stop there. Through Israel, God's blessing would spread little by little to the whole world. That was God's plan, to bless Israel first, that he might bless the whole world. That's God's plan. Again, come back to Psalm 67, and I'm rebuked. So often, my prayers are selfish. Often they're about worldly and material things. Even when I pray for spiritual things, often it's about me. But in Psalm 67, God's people are praying for the blessing of salvation, yes, so that it will spread, so that the gospel will go to the nations. That's verses 3 to 5. Blessing, yes, so that they might be a blessing, that God's name would be praised as he deserves. What a glorious picture. What a wonderful thing to pray. Verses 3 to 5. This is the nations, not Israel. The nations, may the peoples, the nations praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy. For you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. It's a prayer for the international praise of God. All peoples, all cultures, all ethnicities, Turks and Tamils and Icelanders and Inuit and Romanians and Rohingyas, everyone, every tribe and tongue singing in the choir of God's praises. What a wonderful thing to pray. And why are the nations praising God? Because he's just so good. He's so good. He's so good to anyone who finds him. To be saved by this God is to find joy. The middle verse shows why. Verses 3 to 5, they're like a sandwich. 3 and 5 are the same. They're repeated, which emphasizes verse 4 in the middle. Verse 4, may the nations be glad and sing for joy. Why? For you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. God's gospel, which brings us to God, brings his guidance. Without God, we're lost in the dark. We don't know how to live. We make a mess. But when we come back to God, things fall into place. That's what the gospel does. When we find the blessing of salvation, we now know how to live. We find the goodness of God's rule, the freedom of God's guidance. Life lines up and we begin to flourish as we walk in the goodness of God's ways. Isn't this wonderful as you see this happen around the world as the gospel goes forth? I was listening to this man, an Indian academic, Vishal Mangalwadi. He was talking about this effect, Psalm 67, in India. An Indian man, and I learned from him about India because he was talking about the terrible practice in Hindu-based India of widow burning. Horrible practice. A man would die, there'd be a funeral, and his widow would die on the funeral pyre at the cremation. It came from the idea that the widow had no real value anymore now that her husband had died. But Vishal Mangalwadi was teaching about this man, William Carey, the British missionary to India. William Carey brought the gospel, he was one of many, but brought the gospel to India, teaching of the blessing of salvation and the goodness of God. In India, people came to learn of God's good guidance and how every person is valuable. That widow has dignity and value before God. And Vishal Mangalwadi was teaching that it was the gospel and it spread to India that ended or reduced this practice of widow burning. Do you see the goodness of the gospel as it spreads around the world? It brings God's good ways and it brings joy. Friends, this is Psalm 67. Psalm 67. People finding God's goodness and rejoicing. What a wonderful thing to pray for. The spread of the blessing of the salvation from our sins. Israel first and then the nations. Praise God for answering Psalm 67. Because, friends, Psalm 67 has been answered. I'm very good at seeing what I don't have, what I want, what I need. During the pandemic, I felt that. I think we all felt that. We lost all sorts of freedoms, and there was a real grief with that. Of course, it was right to pray for blessing, big and small. I've said that. It's always good to do that. But while I'm very good at seeing what I don't have, I'm not very good at seeing what I do have. We have the answer to Psalm 67. It's a prayer for blessing for salvation to Israel first and then the world. That's happened with Jesus. Jesus is the answer to the prayer of Psalm 67. Where did Jesus begin his ministry? With Israel. Jesus was born as a Jew and he ministered first to Israel. Jesus preached the kingdom of God first to Jewish people. Not because God doesn't care about the nations, precisely because God does care about the nations. Jesus came first for the Jew, then the Gentile, us, just as God had always planned and promised. And that's what that second reading that Lana read was all about. In Romans, Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First to the Jew, then to the Gentile. We as Christian people pray Psalm 67, yes, and I'll come to that. But there's something we need to do first. We need to thank God for answering it because it's already come true. God's blessing has already come to us in the gospel, in the person of Jesus, who died for our forgiveness. Do you remember last year we looked at Ephesians? How did it begin? It's a letter to the Gentiles, to non-Jews like us, and Paul overflows with praise to God. Why? Ephesians chapter 1 verse 3, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing in Christ. We are blessed. Now, already, present tense. Psalm 67 has come true for us. If we belong to Jesus, we are blessed. And Paul goes on to name some of the blessings of the gospel. And it's not health, wealth, and happiness. Those things will come. We'll get those as well. When Jesus comes back, we won't miss out on anything. But the blessings of the gospel that we have now are way better anyway. They're the true treasures. The forgiveness of sins. The presence of the Spirit of God Himself within us. Adoption into God's family as His children. The hope of heaven. Yes, we can pray Psalm 67, but we must begin by thanking God for answering it already. Thank God for others who have prayed this psalm because it's come true in the gospel. Praise God for blessing us by blessing Israel first in sending the Messiah, Jesus Christ, our Saviour. So what does it mean, though, for us to pray it today? What does that mean now? Well, like I said, we can pray for all sorts of blessings. We can pray for COVID to disappear. We can pray for health. We can pray for fine weather on the weekend. We can pray for God to find our lost car keys or house keys. We can pray for anything big or small. Every good gift comes from God. But Psalm 67 lifts our eyes to something way bigger and way better. It's a prayer for the ongoing global spread of the gospel. That's the real blessing that God delights to give. See, God's salvation began moving from Israel to the nations. Remember we saw that? Israel to the nations. That's how God's blessing has begun to spread. But it just keeps going. If we're the nations now, well, God takes His gospel from the nations to more nations. That's the work God's doing now. And that happens through us as the gospel sinks in and as we live it out. To pray Psalm 67 is to pray that we'd so let our light shine before men that they'd see our good deeds and praise our God and Father in heaven. It's to pray for godliness and righteousness. These blessings that adorn the gospel. Of course, we have to speak of Christ as we follow Christ. Otherwise, people will praise us for our godliness, and we don't want that. That's not Psalm 67. To pray Psalm 67 is to pray that the same gospel that has blessed us would sink into our lives and spread from our lips so that the world would find these same blessings as well. Psalm 67 is a prayer for the growing, global, glorifying of God in the gospel. Lots of G's, lots of G words. I'm going to give that to you one more time, then I'm going to finish. To pray Psalm 67 is a prayer for the growing, global, glorifying of God in the spread of the gospel. What a wonderful thing to pray for. So pray Psalm 67, friends. Pray it. Let me close with verses 6 and 7. The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. Amen. Amen. We're going to do a question time now, Mitch, or after the song. We're going to sing, and then we're going to do a question time. I'm going to close in prayer.